You're inside something right now that feels like nothing is moving, like you've been placed on hold while everyone else seems to be advancing. But here's what's actually happening. You haven't been forgotten. You've been chosen for preparation. And the quantum field only prepares those it's about to elevate. Understanding this distinction changes everything about how you move through what comes next. Most of us have been conditioned to believe that silence means something went wrong. That if progress isn't visible, momentum has stopped. But reality doesn't work that way. The universe doesn't prepare your outcomes first. It prepares you to become someone capable of sustaining those outcomes. And that process rarely resembles what we think of as forward motion. This phase strips everything down to essentials. The urgency that used to fuel your days begins to fade. The goals that once pulled you forward with magnetic intensity start to feel strangely distant. You might even notice a growing disinterest in pursuing the very things you once believed would complete you. This isn't apathy creeping in. This is your entire system recalibrating at a frequency you've never accessed before. Something inside you is being adjusted to match what's coming. When you asked for transformation, you didn't just set external events in motion. You activated a complete reorganization of probability itself. And probability doesn't collapse into physical form until the observer becomes coherent with it. The field isn't responding to what you want. It's responding to what you're radiating. And if you're still operating from the internal configuration of your past self, the future you asked for can't land yet. It would shatter on impact. This is exactly why everything feels suspended right now. Your perception is transforming before your circumstances can. Your tolerance for chaos, pressure, and meaningless struggle. The rewards that used to satisfy you no longer register as valuable, not because you failed to achieve them, but because your internal compass has been upgraded. You're being calibrated for something your old self couldn't even recognize as desirable. Science actually validates this more than most people realize. Before any significant identity transformation, the brain enters what neuroscientists call a transitional uncertainty state. The dopamine patterns that once motivated you begin to quiet. Familiar behavioral loops start losing their grip. This isn't breakdown. This is your nervous system creating flexibility, loosening outdated prediction models so it can encode entirely new ones. During this window, your mind will interpret the neutrality as failure, even though you're actually in the most generative state possible for evolution. From a spiritual perspective, you're existing between two identities right now. You no longer feel like who you were, but you haven't fully anchored into who you're becoming. That liminal space creates discomfort because there's nothing familiar to hold on to, nothing to chase, nothing to fix. And for a system that learned to equate constant movement with survival, this stillness registers as danger. This is the exact moment where most people sabotage their own preparation. They interpret the silence as evidence of failure and attempt to manufacture momentum. They pile on more pressure, more goals, more affirmations, more distractions. What they don't realize is they're reactivating the exact frequency that was dissolving. The quantum field registers that interference immediately. It doesn't punish you for this. It simply pauses with precision, waiting for coherence to return. What you've asked for isn't running late. It's waiting for you to become energetically compatible with it. And compatibility doesn't form through force. It forms through release, through letting go of the internal patterns that would fracture your new reality if it arrived before you were ready. This is why preparation feels like things are being subtracted from your life, less external noise, less emotional urgency, less attachment to specific outcomes. You're not being emptied because something is missing. You're being cleared because what's coming requires space to land. The field doesn't layer new realities on top of unstable foundations. It waits until the structure can hold what's being built. Trust becomes everything here. Not because you need blind optimism, but because your mind has nothing familiar left to measure. This is where your grip on control begins to loosen naturally, and your intuition starts to sharpen in ways it never has before. You might notice you're less reactive to triggers that used to derail you, less invested in forcing outcomes, and more attuned to timing instead of urgency. That's not you becoming passive. That's alignment beginning to stabilize inside your system. If you're feeling disconnected from the life you used to live, but you're not anxious about what's ahead, you're not lost. You're being repositioned. The version of you that asked for this transformation cannot receive it while maintaining the same internal posture. Something fundamental has to shift first. And that shift is already happening beneath the surface of your awareness. This phase isn't demanding more action from you. It's asking you to stop interfering with what's already unfolding, to stop insisting on proof before the internal recalibration completes. To recognize that preparation feels invisible only because it's operating at the level that determines everything else in your experience. What you asked for already exists as a quantum possibility, and possibility only collapses into material reality when the observer stabilizes enough to recognize it as natural, not miraculous, not overwhelming, natural, as if it was always meant to be this way. If you're here right now experiencing this quiet alertness, this detached steadiness, this lack of drive paired with heightened awareness, the universe isn't ignoring your request. It's aligning you with precision. And when preparation completes itself, what arrives won't announce itself dramatically. It will feel inevitable, like recognizing something that was always yours. The hardest part about preparation is that it gives your analytical mind nothing concrete to measure. There's no progress bar, no milestone markers, no external validation confirming you're moving in the right direction. And because we've been trained to equate visible movement with actual progress, the mind misinterprets this phase as stagnation. But stagnation is rigid and stuck. What you're experiencing is fluid and alive. When the quantum field begins preparing you for elevation, it doesn't add more energy to your system. It removes interference patterns. And that removal process feels empty to someone who has spent years identifying with effort, urgency, and emotional intensity. The silence you're experiencing isn't absence. It's spaciousness being created for what you can't yet imagine. This explains why preparation often feels like everything around you is slowing down. Conversations start feeling repetitive. Goals that used to drive you feel oddly irrelevant. Situations that would have triggered intense emotional reactions barely register anymore. You haven't become numb or passive. Your nervous system has simply stopped reacting from the survival patterns that used to define your entire identity. From a quantum mechanics perspective, probability only collapses into form when energetic noise decreases. The field doesn't respond to scattered chaotic signals. It responds to clarity. And clarity requires subtraction before any addition can occur. You cannot tune into a completely new frequency while still broadcasting fragments of the old one. The interference would distort everything. This is why it may feel like you're in a holding pattern. But let me assure you, nothing is wrong. Everything is unfolding perfectly. Your preparation is not something that will remain invisible forever. The next stage of your journey will emerge naturally, and it will happen without you forcing it. There is no need for impatience or doubt. Allow yourself to rest in this stillness, knowing that clarity is coming, and with it, everything you've been waiting for. Neuroscience explains this process through the lens of neural reorganization. When your brain is preparing to embody a new identity, it temporarily suspends the old reward circuits. Dopamine spikes, the chemical triggers for motivation and pleasure decrease. The constant chase of external validation and instant gratification loses its appeal. This isn't depression setting in. It's strategic disengagement from behavioral patterns that no longer serve your evolution. Your brain is clearing bandwidth for something new to install itself. It's like resetting a system to make space for a new program, one that aligns with the version of you that's evolving. This is why so many people describe this phase as emotionally neutral, not happy, not sad, just quiet. If you spent most of your life oscillating between desire and frustration, this neutrality can feel deeply unsettling. But neutrality is precisely where internal reorganization happens. It's where new neural predictions can form without being overridden by outdated expectations and fears. Across spiritual traditions, this phase has been described as the void, the desert. The wilderness, not because it's barren or punishing, but because it strips away false orientation systems. You can't rely on your old compass anymore, but the new one hasn't finished calibrating. That in-between space forces you into radical presence, into being here now, without the crutch of past reference points or future projections. This phase challenges trust on a deep level. Trust isn't simply believing that something good will eventually happen. Trust is allowing the entire process to unfold without demanding constant reassurance at every step. The universe tests your trust not through chaos and upheaval, but through sustained stillness. It removes all distractions and observes whether you rush to fill the space with noise. Most people do exactly that. They panic when the noise stops. They return to overthinking, overplanning, overproducing, not because these actions are actually needed, but because the old identity feels unsafe in silence. And every single time they do this, they pull themselves back into the frequency pattern that was trying to dissolve. The preparation pauses and waits. Preparation requires restraint, not inactivity, but restraint from interference. It asks you to notice the moment you're about to fill the space with noise and consciously choose not to. This isn't traditional discipline or willpower. This is maturity of awareness. This is recognizing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. The reason this entire phase feels invisible is because the deepest changes are happening at the causal level. Your relationship with time itself is transforming. You're becoming less rushed, less reactive, and more selective about where you place your attention and energy. That shift alone changes everything about what can manifest even before anything external rearranges itself. During this phase, you may also notice your intuition sharpening. It won't necessarily manifest in dramatic or mystical ways, but it will become practical, grounded, and clearer. You start sensing when to move and when to stay still. You stop trying to force clarity and instead allow it to arrive naturally. This is coherence forming at the quantum level. Coherence is what the field recognizes as readiness. Here's what's essential to understand. Preparation doesn't feel good in the way motivation feels good. It feels stable, grounded, and less emotional. The absence of emotional charge can trick your mind into thinking nothing significant is happening. But the most profound shifts in consciousness rarely announce themselves with emotion. They integrate quietly. They only feel obvious when you look back later. If you're currently in this preparation phase, your only job is not to accelerate it. Trying to speed up the process fractures coherence before it can fully form. Your actual job is to remain present without trying to define what's coming next. To allow the old internal scaffolding to dismantle itself without prematurely rebuilding it. This is the part of manifestation that cannot be rushed because it determines whether what eventually arrives will actually stay in your life or collapse shortly after appearing. The field isn't withholding anything from you. It's ensuring energetic stability before the collapse. And once that stability locks in, the shift doesn't require effort anymore. It requires recognition. You'll know it when it happens, because nothing inside you will argue with it. That's how you'll know preparation has completed itself. What you asked for didn't fail to show up because it was too big or impossible. It paused because the version of you who originally asked for it couldn't sustain it yet. This is the part most manifestation teachings completely skip over. Not every desire can land safely inside the same identity that created the desire in the first place. The quantum field doesn't deliver isolated outcomes. It delivers complete states of being, and every new state carries a corresponding level of responsibility, perception, and internal regulation. If those elements aren't established yet, The field delays not to deny you what you want, but to protect the coherence of the entire system. This is quantum intelligence at work. This is exactly why some manifestations arrive quickly and then collapse just as fast. The external reality shows up before the internal structure is ready to hold it. The nervous system gets overwhelmed. Old coping mechanisms resurface. The identity fractures under the weight of what it received. The person assumes they lost what they manifested when the truth is they simply outpaced their own integration capacity. What you're being prepared for right now is not just the thing you asked for. It's the version of yourself that can live inside that new reality without destabilizing it. From a neurological standpoint, this makes complete sense. Your brain operates primarily on prediction and familiarity. When something arrives that exceeds what your nervous system recognizes as normal or safe, your system interprets it as a threat, even if it's objectively positive. This automatic threat response triggers self-sabotage, withdrawal, or controlling behaviors. Your brain isn't trying to ruin your life. It's trying to preserve internal stability and predictability. That's exactly why preparation focuses on identity transformation before outcome manifestation. Your entire system must learn that the new reality is safe, sustainable, and familiar. And that learning doesn't happen through visualization or imagination alone. It happens through gradual internal recalibration, through reduced urgency, through increased presence, through a fundamentally softened relationship with control. Spiritually, this has always been understood as the expansion of capacity. You don't receive what you want. You receive what you can hold. And holding something entirely new requires releasing the structures that were built to survive without it. This is non-negotiable. This is where the process becomes genuinely uncomfortable, because what dissolves first isn't your external circumstances. It's your self-concept. You start noticing that the version of you who needed to struggle, prove themselves, or constantly anticipate the next obstacle doesn't fit anymore. The old identity starts to feel heavy, outdated, fundamentally misaligned with who you're becoming. This is also why preparation often includes losses that don't look traumatic from the outside. You lose interest in things that used to captivate you. You lose urgency around goals that used to drive you. You lose the emotional charge that once fueled your ambition. And your mind panics because it interprets this loss as regression. But it's not regression at all. It's transition. It's evolution. You're shedding the emotional mechanics that kept you moving when coherence wasn't available yet. The field understands something your conscious mind resists. Effort was always meant to be a bridge, not a permanent destination. The habits that helped you survive the old reality cannot be the same ones that sustain the new one. And until you stop relying on them, the shift remains incomplete. This is why patience becomes absolutely essential during this phase. Not passive, hopeless patience, but embodied, grounded patience. The capacity to stay present without demanding immediate evidence. The ability to remain open without micromanaging the timing of every outcome. The willingness to trust that internal restructuring isn't wasted time, but necessary sequencing that can't be skipped. When your identity stabilizes at the new frequency, manifestation accelerates naturally without any force. Things don't arrive explosively or dramatically. They simply align. Opportunities feel obvious instead of miraculous. Decisions require less mental wrestling. You move at precisely the right moment because your internal timing has synchronized with external timing. That's preparation completing itself. If you're feeling less desperate right now, less reactive, less invested in controlling exactly how things should unfold, that's not a sign you've stopped wanting what you asked for. It's a sign you're becoming energetically compatible with it. The universe isn't asking you to want less. It's asking you to become more internally stable. And stability isn't built through effort or force. It's built through strategic release. What you asked for is not waiting on the other side of time. It's waiting on the other side of identity. And once that new identity locks into place, nothing needs to be forced anymore. Reality recognizes you immediately and responds accordingly. Trust is not what most people think it is. It's not blind optimism. It's not positive thinking. And it's definitely not pretending everything will magically work out. Trust at this quantum level is structural. It's what remains when your need to interfere completely dissolves. The reason trust becomes so critical right before a manifestation collapses into physical form is because interference is the final thing keeping your old identity alive. As long as you feel the urge to constantly check, adjust, rush, or control the process, part of you is still anchored to the version that doesn't fully believe reality can meet you without struggle. From a quantum perspective, collapse into form happens when observation stabilizes, not when desire peaks, not when emotion intensifies, but when the observer stops oscillating between frequencies. And that oscillation comes from doubt, disguised as vigilance and preparedness. This is exactly why the advice to trust the universe feels so frustrating to people still operating from survival-based identities. Because to a nervous system that learned safety only through control, trust feels like danger. It feels like letting go of the only leverage you believe you have. But in truth, control was never leverage. It was compensation for a lack of trust. Neuroscience validates this clearly. When your brain perceives uncertainty, it increases prediction and monitoring behaviors. This creates significant mental noise and interference. And noise disrupts quantum coherence. Trust, in direct contrast, signals safety to your nervous system. When your system relaxes its grip on control, perception naturally widens. Timing improves. Decisions become cleaner. You stop missing opportunities because you're no longer constantly bracing against life itself. Spiritually, trust is the moment you stop negotiating with the future. You're no longer asking when it will happen or whether you're doing it right. Those questions belong to an identity that believes alignment must be continuously earned and proven. The aligned identity doesn't ask those questions anymore because it no longer doubts its fundamental compatibility with what it desires. This is why trust often feels boring to people expecting fireworks. There's no emotional spike, no anticipation, no drama, just steadiness. And that steadiness is precisely what allows reality to reorganize itself efficiently around you. The field responds to stable, consistent signals, not anxious, fluctuating ones. What most people don't realize is that impatience actually delays manifestation far more than doubt ever could. Impatience is an energetic declaration that the present moment is insufficient. And that declaration keeps you oriented toward lack even when everything else in your system has aligned. The field registers that immediately and responds accordingly. Trust is not passive or inactive. It's precisely calibrated. It's the ability to remain internally consistent without needing external confirmation, to stay coherent without proof, to stop adjusting your signal just because nothing visible has happened yet. This is mastery. This is why the final phase of preparation often feels like restraint. You feel the urge to act, explain, or move, and you consciously don't. Not because you're avoiding action, but because action isn't required yet. Timing is what's required, and timing cannot be forced without fracturing the outcome before it fully forms. You may start noticing that when trust stabilizes inside you, synchronicity begins increasing quietly. Conversations land differently. Information arrives at exactly the moment it becomes useful. Opportunities don't feel lucky or random. They feel obvious and natural. That's because your internal timing has synchronized with the field's response patterns. This is the final adjustment before collapse into form. When you no longer ask reality to prove itself to you, when you stop watching the door and simply remain available for what naturally fits, something shifts. And here's the paradox. The moment you truly trust, you stop caring whether it arrives today or next month. And that complete release of urgency is often exactly what allows it to arrive at all. Trust doesn't say, "I hope this works." Trust says, "I don't need to interfere with what's already unfolding." At that point, your old identity has nothing left to do. Its strategies no longer apply. Its fears no longer govern your decisions. And without that resistance, the field completes what it began the moment you first asked. If you're here right now feeling calm, without needing answers, steady without requiring guarantees, and less concerned with timing than you used to be, this is not you giving up. This is you aligning so precisely that effort becomes unnecessary. And when that happens, manifestation doesn't feel magical or miraculous. It feels natural, because the only thing that was ever in the way was your own interference patterns. What we're exploring here is the surface level of what I call conscious broadcasting. The shift from unconsciously transmitting survival static to intentionally radiating coherent frequency. This video touches on preparation, but the complete system of moving from dense transmissions to becoming the broadcast itself contains layers upon layers of understanding. If you're feeling called to explore the full framework of frequency mastery, from breaking free of the hunger signal to embodying the 9 ascending currents that transform consciousness, you'll find that entire journey mapped out in Beyond the Frequencies, a Quantum Guide to Consciousness Mastery. It's linked in the pinned comment below. At this point, preparation is no longer theoretical or conceptual. It's embodied. You don't need more understanding. You need stability. The kind that doesn't fluctuate based on your mood, external timing, or whether you received validation today. This is where manifestation quietly completes itself. Not through action, but through alignment that no longer requires constant supervision. What you asked for was never waiting for the right external conditions. It was waiting for your internal environment to become coherent enough to receive it without distortion. And that coherence isn't excitement. It isn't certainty. It's neutrality paired with readiness. Calm paired with availability. This is why the final phase doesn't feel dramatic or climactic. There's no emotional peak, no sudden moment where everything makes sense. Instead, there's a quiet internal click. A sense that you don't need to chase clarity anymore, that you don't need to rehearse the future or prepare for every possible outcome. You're simply here, present, responsive, grounded. From a quantum perspective, this is when probability collapses cleanly into form. Not because you demanded it or forced it, but because the observer stabilized. The field doesn't rush to impress you or prove itself. It arranges reality efficiently when your signal becomes clear and consistent. And clarity always arrives after interference stops. Neuroscience mirrors this perfectly. When your nervous system finally exits chronic hypervigilance, perception sharpens dramatically. You notice opportunities without actively scanning for them. You respond instead of react. Decisions feel obvious instead of heavy and complicated. That's not luck or chance. That's nervous system regulation meeting divine timing. Spiritually, this is what receiving without grasping looks like. You're no longer trying to manifest or make things happen. You're allowing life to meet you exactly where you already are. And because there's no internal resistance left, what arrives doesn't feel overwhelming or fragile. It feels sustainable. It feels like it can actually stay. This is also where many people unintentionally sabotage themselves, not by doing something wrong, but by doubting the quiet. They expect manifestation to feel explosive and dramatic. When it feels subtle and natural, they assume they somehow missed it. But subtlety is the actual signature of true alignment. Loud, dramatic changes belong to unstable systems. Stable, integrated shifts arrive softly. You don't need to announce that your life is changing. You don't need to prove to anyone that you're aligned. You don't need to explain what you're becoming. The less you interfere with the process, the faster reality completes the transition. If you're in this phase right now, the only thing being asked of you is consistency, not effort. Consistency of presence, consistency of internal posture, consistency of trust without passivity. You move when movement feels clean and aligned. You wait when waiting feels neutral and right. You stop trying to force meaning into every single delay. And this is where structure can actually support your integration. Not as some method to force manifestation, but as a way to remain coherent while reality reorganizes itself around you. That's why quantum rebirth exists. It was created specifically to help stabilize identity during these exact transitions, so you don't unconsciously revert to old patterns the moment things begin to move. Alongside it, the quantum grimoire serves as a practical companion, a space to observe, reflect, and anchor the internal shifts that are already happening without turning them into pressure or performance. You'll find both in the pinned comment below for whenever you feel ready to deepen this integration. Nothing here is about chasing the universe or convincing it to respond. What you asked for is already responding. It's adjusting itself around the version of you that no longer interferes with the process. And when it finally arrives, it won't feel like a miracle. It will feel like recognition, like something that finally fits. Take a moment right now and comment below with this phrase: I trust the preparation not as empty words, but as an energetic declaration to the quantum field that you're no longer resisting what's unfolding, that you recognize this phase for what it actually is, a sacred recalibration. If this resonates with something deeper in you, if you feel it touching a part of your awareness that's been waiting for this understanding, then I invite you to subscribe, not just to this channel, but to this frequency, this space, this movement toward embodied transformation. Because this isn't about consuming content, it's about joining a collective that's consciously choosing to operate differently. Because the truth is simple. Even if it took time for you to see it clearly, you were never being delayed. You were being prepared. And preparation completes itself the moment you stop demanding proof and start trusting the intelligence of what's already in motion. Before we close, drop one word in the comments. Just one word that captures the energy or intention you're choosing to embody moving forward. Let it be your energetic signature to the quantum field, your declaration of who you're becoming. And if you haven't already, subscribe, not just to stay connected, but to stay coherent with this frequency as you continue to evolve. Because the more of us who embody this understanding, the more the collective field shifts to reflect that truth. You're not just transforming your own reality, you're contributing to the transformation of consciousness itself. What happens after preparation completes itself is something most people never discuss because they're so focused on the arrival of what they ask for that they miss the most critical part, the integration phase, the moment when your new reality becomes your baseline and you have to learn how to operate from that elevated state without reverting to old patterns. This is where many people lose what they manifested, not because they weren't worthy, but because they didn't understand that receiving is only half of the equation. Sustaining is the other half, and sustaining requires a completely different skill set than manifesting does. When what you asked for finally arrives, your nervous system will be tested not by the universe, but by your own conditioning. Every part of you that learned to survive through struggle will question why things suddenly feel easy. Every part of you that built an identity around overcoming obstacles will wonder who you are without them. Every part of you that equated suffering with growth will feel disoriented by the absence of resistance. This is the moment when most people unconsciously sabotage themselves. They create drama where none exists. They manufacture problems to solve. They find reasons to doubt what's working. Not because they're broken or self-destructive, but because their nervous system doesn't recognize ease as safe. It only recognizes familiar patterns as safe. And if familiar meant struggle, ease will register as dangerous. This is why preparation includes neurological reconditioning. You're not just waiting for what you asked for. You're being rewired to recognize it as normal when it arrives. You're learning to trust stability instead of chaos. You're training your system to feel safe. Rather than only feeling safe. From a quantum perspective, this reconditioning is essential. The observer doesn't just collapse probability into form. The observer sustains that form through continued coherent observation. If your observation becomes unstable after manifestation, the manifestation itself becomes unstable. This is quantum mechanics playing out in lived experience. Most manifestation teachings focus exclusively on the asking and the receiving. They skip the part where you have to become someone who can keep what arrived. They skip the integration work, the identity anchoring the nervous system regulation that allows you to remain coherent at the new frequency even when old triggers resurface, because they will resurface not as tests from the universe, but as remnants of old neural pathways seeking activation. Your brain will present scenarios that feel like invitations to return to the old frequency, opportunities to doubt moments that feel like problems requiring your old problem-solving identity. And if you're not prepared for this, you'll take the bait without realizing what's happening. This is where the real mastery begins. Not in the manifestation itself, but in the conscious choice to remain stable after it arrives. To notice when your system is trying to create familiar chaos and choose differently. To recognize when you're about to reach for old coping mechanisms and pause instead. To feel the pull of the past and consciously orient toward the present. Preparation teaches you this before you need it. It gives you practice in remaining coherent without external validation, in staying centered when nothing is happening, in trusting the process when there's no evidence of movement. All of this is training for what comes after, for the moment when your new reality becomes your lived experience and you have to choose it consciously every single day. Because manifestation isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous choice to remain aligned with what you called in. It's a daily practice of choosing the new identity over the old one, of choosing trust over control, of choosing presence over urgency. And if preparation didn't teach you how to make those choices, you'd lose your manifestation the moment your nervous system felt threatened by its presence. This is also why preparation often feels longer than you expect. It's not just preparing you to receive, it's preparing you to sustain. And sustainability requires deeper transformation than initial manifestation does. It requires you to change at the identity level, not just the behavioral level. It requires you to shift your baseline frequency, not just experience temporary elevation. Think about anyone you know who manifested something significant and then lost it quickly. A relationship that started intensely and ended dramatically. A financial windfall that disappeared faster than it arrived, a career opportunity that imploded shortly after beginning. In almost every case, the pattern is the same. The external reality arrived before the internal structure was ready to hold it. Their nervous system couldn't sustain the new frequency. The old identity reasserted itself. The familiar patterns reclaimed dominance, and the manifestation collapsed because the observer became unstable. This isn't failure. This is simply physics. Unstable observation creates unstable reality. Preparation prevents this. It stabilizes the observer before the collapse into form occurs. It ensures that when your manifestation arrives, you're already someone who can sustain it. Someone who recognizes it as natural rather than foreign. Someone whose nervous system registers it as safe rather than threatening. This is why rushing preparation always backfires. You might force something to arrive through sheer willpower or intensity, but if you haven't stabilized internally, it won't stay. You'll either lose it quickly or have to maintain it through constant effort and control, which defeats the entire purpose of alignment. True manifestation feels effortless once it arrives. not because you're doing nothing, but because you're operating from coherence rather than compensation. You're maintaining frequency through presence rather than through force. You're sustaining reality through stable observation rather than through anxious vigilance. And here's what most people miss. The preparation phase is actually showing you how to sustain what's coming by teaching you how to remain stable when nothing visible is happening. If you can stay coherent during the void, you can stay coherent during the fulfillment. If you can trust the process when there's no evidence, you can trust yourself when evidence appears. If you can release control during preparation, you can release control during manifestation. Every moment of this preparation is practice for what comes next. Every instance of choosing trust over anxiety. Every moment of remaining present instead of projecting into the future. Every choice to stop interfering with the process. All of it is training your nervous system to operate from a completely different baseline. This is also where many people realize they were asking for the wrong things. Not wrong in a moral sense, but wrong in the sense that they were asking from an identity that no longer exists. During preparation, as your frequency shifts, your desires often shift with it. What felt urgent before starts feeling irrelevant. What felt impossible before starts feeling obvious. What felt necessary before starts feeling optional. This isn't the universe denying you what you asked for. This is you outgrowing the version of yourself that asked for it. And the field is intelligent enough to recognize this. It won't deliver outcomes to an identity that no longer desires them. It adjusts based on your current frequency, not your past requests. This is why some people complete preparation and realize they don't want what they originally asked for anymore. They've evolved beyond it. They become someone who desires something completely different. And rather than delivering the old request, the field delivers what matches their new frequency. At this stage, you're learning how to exist with the new frequencies, to allow them to permeate your reality without the need for continuous effort. What you once desired is no longer the same thing you want today. This shift in desires isn't a failure or a disappointment. It's a natural evolution. You've evolved and in the process outgrown some of your previous desires. The field, in its profound intelligence, knows when your desires are in alignment with your current energetic state and when they no longer serve you. It won't give you something that no longer aligns with who you are becoming, but rather it will bring you what matches your new frequency, something more aligned, more sustainable, and more suited for the version of you that has grown. This is the beauty of true manifestation. It's not about forcing something into your life that you believe you need. It's about becoming the person who can hold and sustain the things that naturally arrive when you're in alignment with your highest self. The most powerful shift occurs when you stop chasing what you once wanted and allow yourself to naturally receive what is in harmony with your growth and evolution. And so as you continue on your journey of preparation and manifestation, remember that the process isn't linear. It's a dance between stability, trust, and alignment. It's about continually choosing presence over urgency and allowing the universe to show you in its perfect timing what it has always had ready for you. You've already done the work. Now you simply need to trust the process and be present as your new reality begins to integrate into your life. This is grace, not rejection. If you're experiencing this shift in your own desires right now, drop a comment sharing what's changing for you. What did you think you wanted that's transforming into something else? Your reflection might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. But for most people, what happens is refinement. The core desire remains, but the form it takes shifts. You still want the relationship, but you're no longer looking for someone to complete you. You still want the abundance, but you're no longer seeking it to prove your worth. You still want the freedom, but you're no longer running from responsibility. Preparation refines your desires by refining your identity, and refined desires manifest with far less resistance than desperate ones do. They arrive cleanly because they're coherent with who you've become, not just what you think you want. This refinement process can feel confusing because the mind still remembers the original request. It wonders why things are shifting. It questions whether you're giving up or settling. But you're not giving up. You're upgrading. You're allowing your desires to evolve as you evolve. You're trusting that what matches your current frequency will serve you better than what matched your past frequency. The field always delivers what's coherent with your present state, not what was coherent with your past state. This is why trying to hold on to old desires while your identity transforms creates so much internal friction. You're asking the field to deliver to a version of you that doesn't exist anymore. And the field can't do that. It can only respond to who you are now. This is where surrender becomes essential again. Not surrender as in giving up, but surrender as in letting go of rigid attachment to specific forms. Trusting that if your desires shift during preparation, it's because you're being guided towards something better, something more aligned, something that will actually satisfy you at your new frequency, instead of just temporarily filling a void from your old frequency. Many people resist this refinement process. They insist on holding on to their original vision, even as everything inside them is changing. They interpret the shift in desire as weakness or lack of commitment. But it's not weakness. It's wisdom. It's your system recognizing that what you thought you needed isn't what you actually need anymore. The field will never force outdated manifestations onto evolved identities. It adjusts in real time. It responds to your current signal, not your historical one. And if your signal has fundamentally changed during preparation, your manifestation will reflect that change. This is precision, not punishment. What you're learning through all of this is discernment, the ability to distinguish between authentic desire and conditioned wanting, between what truly serves your evolution and what merely appeases old wounds, between what your soul is calling for and what your ego thinks it needs. Preparation strips away the conditioned layers till you can hear your authentic desire clearly, until you know what you actually want versus what you think you should want, until you can feel the difference between aligned calling and compensatory grasping. And that clarity becomes the foundation for manifestations that actually fulfill you rather than just temporarily satisfying you. This is why preparation can't be rushed or skipped. This level of clarity requires time, space, and deep internal honesty. It requires you to sit with yourself long enough to hear what's true, long enough to feel what's authentic, long enough to know what actually matters to you beyond conditioning, comparison, and cultural programming. The people who rush through this phase often manifest things that look impressive externally, but feel empty internally. They get what they thought they wanted only to realize it doesn't satisfy them the way they expected. They achieve the goal only to feel disconnected from it. They receive the manifestation only to wonder why it doesn't feel like enough. This is the consequence of manifesting from an unrefined desire, from a request that came from conditioning rather than clarity from asking before becoming. The manifestation arrives, but it arrives to the wrong person, to the version of you that asked, not the version of you that exists now. And the mismatch creates dissatisfaction, even in the presence of achievement. Preparation prevents this by ensuring alignment before manifestation, by refining both the desire and the desirer simultaneously, by making sure that what arrives matches who you've become, not just what you once asked for. This is why it takes as long as it takes. Because the universe isn't just organizing circumstances, it's ensuring coherence across all levels of your being. And when that coherence finally locks in, when preparation completes itself, you'll know, not because something dramatic happens externally, but because something settles internally, a deep knowing that you're ready, that you've become someone who can receive and sustain what's coming, that you've integrated the lessons preparation was teaching you all along. At that point, manifestation becomes inevitable. Not because you've earned it or proved yourself worthy, but because you've become coherent with it. Because the observer has stabilized. Because your frequency matches what you're calling in. Because there's no internal resistance left to delay or distort the collapse into form. Consider returning to this video each morning this week. Let it reset your understanding of what preparation actually is, and watch how that shift in perception creates its own energetic ripple. When you share this with someone else navigating their own waiting period, you're not just passing along information. You're activating their recognition of what's already unfolding within them, while simultaneously deepening your own coherence with these principles. That exchange accelerates manifestation for both of you through the collective field. This is the moment everything changes. Not loudly or dramatically, but quietly and completely. Reality begins reorganizing itself around your new frequency. Opportunities appear that match your refined desires. People enter your life who resonate with your elevated state. Circumstances shift to accommodate what you've become. And none of it feels forced or miraculous. It all feels natural, inevitable, like it was always meant to be this way. Because it was. From the moment you asked, the field began preparing everything. Not just preparing you to receive, but preparing the entire web of circumstances, connections, and conditions required for your manifestation to arrive sustainably. And now that preparation has completed itself, the delivery can occur without resistance. This is what trust was always pointing toward. Not blind hope that things would work out, but deep knowing that the intelligence orchestrating your preparation knows exactly what it's doing. That every moment of waiting served a purpose. That every instance of silence was actually recalibration. That every delay was actually divine timing, ensuring everything aligned perfectly. The universe selected you for this preparation. Trust it. Now, if you've recognized that you're past the hardest part of this preparation phase, there's something essential you need to understand about what comes next. The transition from preparation into manifestation carries its own hidden dynamics that most people miss entirely. And that's exactly what we explore in the next video. You'll discover why the moment just before breakthrough feels identical to the moment before collapse, how to recognize which one you're experiencing, and the subtle shift that determines whether what you've been preparing for actually lands or slips away. This understanding becomes critical once preparation completes, because without it, you can sabotage your manifestation at the final moment without even realizing it.